All right, so we have Chapter 1, an introduction to anatomy and physiology. Is that super loud? I'm going to have Miss Bauer come over here and yell at me, probably. All right, so this is what I have for our overall learning target. I do want you to write this down. This is what you see at the corner of the board. And what this is meant to be is just a general, overall learning target for Chapter 1. By the end of Chapter 1, we should be fairly confident that we can do this. We can communicate the basic concepts of human anatomy and physiology, because really that's what this chapter is about. Introduction to human anatomy and physiology. So we can communicate, which means we can share information. We could teach somebody that didn't know basic concepts of human anatomy and physiology. So as I just said, that's kind of vague. So as we're doing this, as we're going through Chapter 1, are you progressing? Are you moving toward that goal of being able to do this, communicate basic concepts of human anatomy and physiology? And this is one of the areas we're really focusing on with our teaching, and it goes along with our evaluations, is that in order for you guys to be able to learn something, it's important that we're clear to you about what it is you're supposed to learn. Now, if I just left it here, can you communicate the basic concepts of human anatomy and physiology? Yep. I can tell you that people have hair. Okay, good job. And that's not really it. So we have success criteria that are a little more individualized depending on the lesson and the day. So you want to write these down for sure, absolutely, because these are things that we want to be paying attention to as we go along. And as you can tell by what we just did with today's journal, no surprise, number one, we can describe basic functions of living things, which you're going to see are going to match up with a lot of the things that you guys just discussed in your groups. That's the first thing. Now, not today, but soon, coming up next, you're going to be able to compare and contrast the terms anatomy and physiology. I like to call this class human phys for short. But it's not really just human physiology, and it's not just human anatomy, it's anatomy and physiology, and you're going to see why that's important. Number three, third thing you can do is I can identify the major levels of organization in living organisms. As I was going around listening to discussions, even back to first hour, one person started off with the very basic, all living things are made up of atoms and molecules. Would you agree with that? I would agree as well. And then also in that hour, and as I heard in this hour, some people started to talk about they're made up of cells. Okay? Would you guys agree with that? At least one, right? Okay? So what we're doing there, going from atoms and molecules up to cells, is we're starting to hit on this levels of organization thing right away. Okay? Living things are made up of atoms and molecules and made up of cells. Now, we can't necessarily say that atoms and molecules, if something has atoms and molecules, it's a living thing, because this desk right here has atoms and molecules, doesn't it? Would you call the desk a living thing? Neither would I. Okay? So those are our three beginning success criteria, things that we want to be able, if we can do those things, and these are things you're going to be quizzed on, then we are in good shape. All right, so the actual info, section 1.1, talking about the basic functions of living things. All right, now, by the way, when we take notes, you want to write quickly. I know this is difficult for some people because they like to have their notes look super pretty. They've got to look cute. My handwriting needs to look immaculate. And that's going to probably become an issue depending on how, there's probably ways around it. But I know that when I wrote notes, I told you when I wrote notes in college, I wrote everything the instructor said. Everything. And so in order for me to write nice and neat and slowly, it wouldn't have worked. You need to write quickly and make it just clear enough that you can understand what it is later on. When my friend and I used to study together, he's actually a veterinarian now, um, but we used to study together and we'd look at each other's notes and we sometimes had trouble figuring out what we wrote ourselves. And it would usually come back to us. But you want to be quick. So one thing you'll hear me say a lot when we do notes is that you need to write quickly. And then I always use the same joke every year. Someday when you guys go to U of M, or even better, Schoolcraft, you're going to have to write as fast as the professor is speaking. And then because this microphone only picks up my voice really in here, that's why if you watch this video later, you won't be able to hear all the laughter that just took place. So we have movement. I don't know why I made it boldface, but it is. Movement. Living things move. But it doesn't necessarily mean that something that moves is living. And you can probably think of certain situations where it doesn't seem like, if you go down to the simplest levels, do all living things really move? But as I put on here a little note, it could be external movement or internal. And one thing that we know as we go through this related to other areas that we're going to talk about for basic functions is that we need to be able to, even just simple cells need to be able to transport things from one place to another within the cell. Okay? And we need to be able to move things through our body. Last hour, one of my students put blood flow. And some of the people in the group were like, I don't know if that's really, one of them. And I came over there, and it's another example of having confidence and not being shy, blood flow. And I went over there and said, yeah, pretty much. That's one of the things that feeds right into the very first one I put up there. The second one is called respiration. But really what it is metabolism. All right, so metabolism, I saw that as I went around the room. All the chemical operations underway in our bodies. Everything going on. Thousands upon thousands of chemical reactions taking place right now so that we can live. And there are things in our bodies, these catalysts. Does anybody know what a catalyst is? What is it? We did learn about it in chemistry. It's not an extra product. Does it react with it? Is it actually part of the reaction? You guys are on the track. You guys must have a really good chemistry teacher. No, you didn't? It was me. But yeah, you're close. So a catalyst is something that doesn't actually get used up in the reaction. It's not actually a reactant. It's not actually a product. But its presence allows the actual reactants to combine and the chemical reaction to take place. And this is why fever is so scary, is because if temperature in our body gets too high, we can change the shape of these enzymes. And when we change the shape of these enzymes, which they call denaturing, they no longer work. And some of the chemical reactions that we depend on in our body in order to live wouldn't take place naturally for thousands of years unless these enzymes are present. So that's why it gets scary, super scary. So metabolism, all the chemical operations underway in the body. Respiration here, so what does that mean? Well, respiration, we're talking about absorption, transport, and use of O2 by cells, which we need to have for energy. Living things need energy. So we have movement, we have respiration. Letter C is sensitivity, which is sometimes put down as adaptability. We can also talk about adjustments to stimuli. So as we saw, response to environment was put down a lot. Okay? Response to environment and adaptability, we just kind of put them together. When we talked about, when we had our class discussion, we were talking about how we could kind of um, keep them separate. This also is closely tied to another one I was going to mention at the end. It's another thing that we could kind of put in here. I left it separate because we're going to talk about it more in detail. But a word that popped up from a lot of groups as we were discussing our journals was homeostasis. And so homeostasis is basically living things need to be able to maintain some kind of fairly stable inside environment. And so being able to adapt to changes, because everything's not always the perfect situation, perfect environment all the time. Different things happen. And so internally, our bodies need to have ways of dealing with that. All right, growth was one we heard. Reproduction. And reproduction, I put in make simple copies of itself, and that was actually, my brain must have wandered, because I meant to say make similar copies. I don't know what I was thinking. Make similar copies of itself. Are you guys done with this slide? Okay, we need to get rid of excess stuff, unneeded materials, or potentially harmful things. So we call this excretion, getting rid of unneeded or potentially harmful waste products of metabolism. So metabolism is making products that our body needs, but it doesn't always make the exact right amount. And the last one is nutrition. Nutrition is being able to take in nutrients needed for metabolism. That kind of goes with what you saw for respiration. So there could be some confusion a little bit here between nutrition and respiration. But respiration was referring more to O2, and we were tying it into really understanding metabolism, all the chemical processes that are taking place in the body. Whereas nutrition is just talking to be whatever we need to do for energy in our bodies in order to survive, to keep living. We've got to have a way to get those nutrients. Okay? And then I put Mrs. Gren. Okay, so like I told you before, this type of class, there's going to be a lot of memorizing. That's the way it goes. So Mrs. Gren, if you can remember that, you can at least remember the letters of the things that we were just talking about. Does anybody know what that M stands for without looking at your notes? M is movement, right. What about the first R? That was respiration. And I want you to think of it as respiration / metabolism. Okay. So movement, respiration, S without looking at your notes. I see a lot of eyes darting down. Sensitivity. Okay, so there's Mrs. Gren. What's the G? Growth. The second R? Reproduce. The E? Excretion, getting rid of waste. N? Nutrition. So really, in order for us to meet that first success criterion, you guys need to be able to remember Mrs. Gren. Sometimes they call her Mrs. C. Gren. And the C in the middle stands for control, which is really referring to homeostasis, which you guys brought up. Okay? And so we are going to finish off here with an exit ticket. So on your journal ticket sheet, exit ticket, which I might abbreviate ET from now on, or just T for ticket, 914. I know you're in a group setting, but I want you to do this on your own. I'm going to come around and take a look at them. But I just want you to jot down, how do these basic functions compare to the characteristics that you and your group came up with? All right.